We are Gold Ivy.
Our mission is to empower you to own and unleash your truth.
Stories of resiliency are gold, and ivy grows in hard places.
Those hard places are what creates space for light to shine through.
You decide what works for your daily life and how to transform our lessons into your gold.
This is Ivy Unleashed,
a Gold Ivy production. It's here. Our Move with Gold Ivy virtual workout platform is ready for you.
It's beautiful, it's easy to navigate, and it's absolutely packed with all kinds of workouts that will help you strengthen, trim, pump up, tone, energize, de-stress, all the things we want our body to feel. It's within Move.
Our dream has been to create accessible, affordable, and efficient workouts that you can do anytime and anywhere. But not only that, we have a weekly plan that you can follow so you don't have to think about it.
Everyone has been asking for a way to plan out their week and maximize their results, and we have the answer. Move with Gold Ivy. You can pick any workout you want at any time, but if you do want a plan that alternates muscle groups and leaves your body feeling energized and strong, we have the resources for you.
Speaking of resources, Move will also have a ton of them. We'll be adding all kinds of resources exclusive for Move members for your mental and physical health. We want you to get the most value out of our workout platform, and we will continually add kick-ass workouts, gut health information, physical challenges, and mental health resources that will leave you feeling ready to tackle life with energy and vitality like never before.
On top of the resources and virtual workouts, we will also be hosting live workouts.
So you're probably wondering about cost, and we're excited to share that for a limited time, only this month in January 2023, Move is free for a week and then only $10 a month.
And you can lock in this $10 a month founder rate right now to hold forever. We know the value of our workouts and resources are worth more, but wanted to honor and celebrate our biggest supporters in these first few months of launching Move.
So head on over to goldivyhealthco.com/move or find the link within the show notes of this episode and sign up today. This free week and monthly price, cheaper than any monthly membership you'll find, is going to end soon. So snag your spot and reap the benefits that you deserve to feel this year.
It's your time. Move for your health, move for your confidence, move for your mental clarity, move with Gold Ivy.
Welcome back to Ivy Unleashed. Thank you so much for being here. These 2 episodes this week are so powerful. We were connected to Danny J through our mutual friend, Alan Stein Jr. We watched her TEDx Talk and cried our eyes out. Her resilience is unmatched, and her perspective after all she's been through is hard to fathom. Danny J has been in the fitness industry. She's been a money mindset coach. She's the podcast host of the Best Life podcast that has 1.6 million downloads. And she has also experienced hardship with teenage pregnancy, a hospitalization for suicidal ideation. She's been paralyzed. She's experienced so much loss. She's had a cheating spouse and a divorce, and experienced a pandemic that swept away her career opportunities. And after all of that, Danny J gave herself the title of Do-Over Danny. We felt honored to hear her story and are so excited that you get to hear it too. So keep listening today and then tune back in on Thursday, January 26th for part 2, where the conversation continues about her experience with different healing modalities, including ayahuasca. Every second with Danny J is an opportunity to learn and grow with someone that has firsthand life experience with it all. Danny J, we hardly know you, but we love you. Your honesty, your warmth, your vulnerability, your humor, and the way you share your personal experiences to help people improve the quality of their life gave us more drive to keep doing our work to light up the world. Thank you so much. And now to part 1 of Ivy Unleashed with the one and only Danny J.
Welcome back to Ivy Unleashed. We are so excited because not only is today our 2-year anniversary of launching Gold Ivy and Ivy Unleashed, but we have the most special guest to celebrate with us in the house, well, in Las Vegas. We have Danny J. Danny, welcome to Ivy Unleashed.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, in my house and in your house. So we're in a house. I'm so excited to be here. And congratulations on 2 years.
Thank you.
There's so many podcasts out there that never get past. I think the statistic is like 18 episodes and most people quit. So if you're still going, you are winning at life.
I love that you just said that because you're the epitome of just like, don't give up in so many ways. And we're going to get into it. But just following you and listening to your podcast, I was thinking the same thing of like, I just feel like you don't give up. Like you and Jill have the Best Life podcast, and they talk so much about everything under the sun. And it's just exactly what Brooke and I are trying to do, where it's like, it's not cookie cutter. Like you're saying, I'm really struggling with this, or this is super hard for me, or this is what I went through and it was ugly and I got cheated on and I'm going to talk about it. And it's so real and raw. And so if you have not listened to the Best Life podcast, we highly recommend. There's every topic under the sun, and it's a beautiful podcast. So thank you for providing that to the world.
Oh, thank you. You know, it's funny when we started the podcast, if you listen all the way back, we're over 300 something episodes in, but the very first episode, Jill and I decided that we were going to share the stories of our husbands having affairs, and we were freaking terrified. We didn't know how it was going to come across. We didn't want to throw anyone under the bus. We wanted to very carefully share the story from our perspective and how we learned from it. And I don't even know if we knew where we were going with the podcast. We're like, let's just see how this feels. And I remember the main thing was, and I think you all are doing this the same, especially with your name, is we just said to each other, if this helps one person feel less alone, then it will be worth it. And that's constantly been the mantra throughout everything. So every time we share really hard shit, we are like, if this just helps one person, then it's going to be worth it. And that's really kind of what all the sharing has been about. So I love that you shared with me right before this about Ivy growing in hard places, because I think so many people go through hard things, but we're afraid to share that. But I think in sharing, it helps anyone else going through hard shit feel less alone. And I think that's really what it's all about. So just wanted to say that.
Well, and speaking about the affairs, I think to hear what you both went through in your experience, it was both were very different. And I think to the way that the lessons that you learned and shared, it was so interesting to see how you both like owned pieces of your part in the relationship. And it sounds like, what? Like they cheated on me. Of like, it's their fault. Like screw them or whatever. But then you've had time to like take a step back. And I don't know if you are interested at all in hearing about Jill and Danny J's experience with it. Like I would definitely go back. It's like episode 1 or 2. It's like way back. It's so good.
Yeah. I think episode 2 and 3 is the lesson. So it's early on, which I think is a great intro to the podcast too, and who we are.
Yes.
Yeah. So you started talking about the affair, and we'll get into kind of the past and really why you're here. But what is life like for you now that you are 1.6 million downloads of the podcast? Like, what are you focusing on? What are you most proud of now?
Oh my gosh, this is so wild. So the pandemic really changed everything for me. And I think a lot of people, I was traveling full time from 2018 to 2020, didn't live anywhere. I actually moved out of my apartment. And I kept thinking I'll get a new place sometime soon, but then I'd go somewhere else, and I was doing a lot of speaking, a lot of retreats. And so it didn't make sense for me to be paying rent anywhere when I was never home. So I just was living out of a suitcase, out of Airbnbs, out of hotels. And then of course the pandemic stopped that. I ended up in an Airbnb, and we got stuck there for 4 months. And it turned into this, like, suddenly it's longer and longer. And of course, you know, the pandemic kept extending, and then my gigs that got canceled in the spring, they moved into the fall, and they got canceled again in the fall. So all of that to be said, like my whole life has massively shifted. So I've been joking around, but I got a puppy last December, and 2020 and 2021 were really hard years for me. I mean, as you get to know my story, there's been a lot of really hard years. So I don't know. There's nothing that's been the hardest, I don't think, just it's hardest in the moment. But I got a puppy December 1st, and she has been the best thing. And I'm like, right now, I'm just, what I'm most proud of and excited about is being a stay-at-home dog mom.
That is the last thing we need to hear right now, because we have puppy fever so bad.
Oh my God. I had it the worst. I was just like obsessively on Instagram saving dogs, and we looked for months and we finally got her, and it was just the best thing I ever did. So I was so scared because of the travel. I'm like, is this going to ruin my life? I can't bring her, but we got a small puppy. We bring her most of the places we go to, and she's just been super fun and just has made so much joy in my life. So yeah, so that, and I'm really excited. Actually, you asked about the podcast. Jill and I are really going to go more all in this next year. So we haven't done video the whole time, which we probably should have, but we're going to start doing video, adding that component. We're actually going to be I'm going to be adding my own show to it. She has another show. I think we're going to be combining our shows. So we're going to have more content. So instead of 2 days a week, it's going to be more like 3 to 5 days a week of content. And I'm excited about that.
Wow. That's awesome. Well, and how we originally saw you was your TEDx talk, which, you know, I'm sure everybody's listened to a TED Talk, but yours brought us to tears. Like yours is a completely different TED Talk. It's like, I love hearing about the brain and how things work, or like a new scientific study or whatever. But
this one's like, holy shit.
Yes. Yes. Holy shit. And I don't know how you packed what you packed into
15 minutes.
Yeah, it was so beautiful. And, you know, you are just an eloquent speaker in general, but you are an expert in starting over. And so we would love for you to explain to our listeners how you've become an expert in starting over.
Well, I'd love to not be an expert in starting over because sometimes that feeling is really shitty. But the ironic thing about the pandemic was this is kind of where it came from. My background was in fitness. As far as my professional background, I should say, there's kind of some iterations and I'll get into that. But my background was in fitness. I was doing a lot of personal training, online training, loved it. I loved helping my clients have massive weight loss. I was really successful. My clients were getting in magazines. I was doing fitness modeling in magazines. And I had this I call it a brand identity crisis, but it was really more like what the hell does this life matter kind of crisis. In 2013, December, I went to an orphanage for Christmas. And while we were there, Christmas Eve, this staff was helping make lunch, but we were not going to be eating breakfast that day. I think lunch was like a late lunch dinner kind of thing because it was a Christmas Eve meal. So we didn't get to eat all day and I was so hungry. And finally, someone brought like this Wonder Bread and peanut butter sandwich. They're like, here, if you're hungry. And mind you, I was a fitness competitor and I was super lean. Everything was about my body. And my first thought when they brought that sandwich was, ew, I'm not going to eat those carbs. And at the same time this thought happened, I'm like, oh my God, there's nothing else to eat. I'm so hungry. And then my next thought is, this is all they have to eat. And then I was going, what the hell is my problem that I can actually snub my nose at any kind of food? And these kids that live here don't get a choice. They don't get to choose what carbs to eat. And I was a personal trainer and I'd have people messaging me all the time. They're like, hey, can I eat this? And I remember just thinking, what if one more person asks me if they can eat carbs after 4 o'clock, I'm going to scream. I can't believe this is what we're worried about right now. Mm-hmm. And the truth of the matter was I was attracting a lot of binge eating clients, a lot of women, and they'd come to me and they're like, I just need to lose 30 pounds, or I just need to lose X amount of weight. So, okay, let's see what you're eating. So they give me their diaries, their food diaries. And I'd look at it and I'm like, nothing's glaringly wrong with this. But as I started to work with them more and more, I'm like, it's not about what you're eating, it's what's eating you. And it was more like they'd be secretly binge eating. They were not having conversations with their partners. There was a lot of resentment towards their parents. There was all of this unresolved trauma. And I was going, this is not what they need. You don't need another meal plan. You need to deal with the shit in your life. So I had this brand identity crisis. I can't talk about food anymore. I just can't do it. If one more person asks me, I'm going to lose my shit. And then I got these kids out here in the world and this doesn't matter anymore. And so I didn't feel like what I was doing, it does matter. Proper nutrition matters, but I didn't feel like that was what my calling was anymore. So I started to talk about other things like the trauma, like money mindset, like getting out of debt, like having conversations with your spouse, like dealing with shit with your parents. And that kind of led down to the next thing I was doing, which was speaking and money mindset. And then with the pandemic crashing, everything, I had a calendar full of events that I was going to be going to. It was like Paris, New York, everything just getting erased because people were calling me. They're like, hey, we canceled this event. And so it's literally like I'm in LA. People are wearing masks outside and I'm just freaking lost because I just had like my last event canceled on the calendar. And I'm crying to my boyfriend. And I was like, I don't even know what I'm an expert anymore. I don't even know what I do. Like, I don't want to be a fitness expert. And then I was tired of talking about the money because it was kind of the same thing. I'm like, I didn't want to pigeonhole myself in that box with like Dave Ramsey and stuff. I'm like, I'm not a money expert. I'm like, the only thing I'm an expert at is starting over. I'm like, do over Danny. And I said this as I'm crying and I said it and I started laughing at myself. I'm like, oh my God, that's hilarious. Like, do over Danny. And then I started going, yeah, actually, that's true. Like, I have had to start over so many times that is what I'm a freaking expert in. I've had to start over. So kind of back to my like TEDx story is I was a pregnant teenager. I was actually in a mental health, I don't know, crazy town place where you go when you're about to commit suicide. Behavioral health center. That's the technical name for it. And I found out I was pregnant there. I went there because I was suicidal, found out I was pregnant. First thing I said was I'm going to have an abortion because I'm going to kill myself. So why do I care if I kill this baby? Nothing mattered to me. It was nothing, right? It just was like, I did not care so much. And I hated myself so much. And that was like my first big iteration. I left that place. Kind of the short story of it is I met this woman and she just touched me and I said, I want you to have my baby. And it was the day before I was supposed to have my abortion. And so I ended up having my daughter, and that was one of the most life-changing moments for me because I remember looking at her and I still, every time I say this, I could never say it without tearing up, but I'd still plan on killing myself until I had her. And I remember looking at her and I knew she was going to another home. And I was like, well, when she asked about her birth mother and she finds out that I killed myself, what if she thinks it's her fault? And I just thought she was so perfect. And Andrea, you have kids and you're like, how could I do that to this child? Because how is she going to know the difference? And of course, like, that's what somebody's going to think. And I'm like, I can't do that to somebody. And so it was like this just one decision of, I remember it's so silly what I was thinking. I just have to find something to do. Like, it's not about like what to live for. I just need to find something to do to like not be bored or something. I didn't have any goals. I thought I was going to be dead. So I didn't know what I was going to be when I grew up. I didn't have any job aspirations. And so I started just making these stupid little goals. Like I had this goal to see 30 countries before I turned 30. And I just started doing these things just to like keep myself alive for the most part. And so that was like my first do-over. It was like, okay, you're starting over and literally you're choosing to be here now because you're all in. You can't, back out and take yourself out anymore. And then at 21 years old, I became an acrobat at SeaWorld. I was actually a gymnast growing up. And so after I got pregnant, that stopped. But then I got a job at SeaWorld after college. And I ended up being paralyzed from the water there. I got a bacterial infection and it lodged in my sacroiliac joint and I couldn't walk. And that was kind of the second round of major suicidal ideation. I felt like it was the best job of my life. I loved it so much. And because I had nothing to look forward to before, I was like, this is what life's about. This is so fun. It's exhilarating. And I'm doing something I love. And then it got taken away from me. And I'm like, how fair is that? That everything I love is now taken from me. And my degree was in physical education. So I'm like, can't be a PE teacher, can't be like, what am I supposed to do if I can't walk, right? I'm going to be like the handicapped PE teacher. It doesn't make any sense. So why even be alive? And that sent me down the same kind of spiral I was in. I was just taking pain medicine just to sleep the day away. And I had this beautiful friend who was a few years younger than me that got diagnosed with cancer. And she came to visit me and she had just gone through chemo and her cancer was terminal. And I remember opening the door. And at this point I was using a walker. And I actually was never in a wheelchair. I was able to move one leg like a little bit so I could kind of drag a walker and lean on it. And I opened the door and she just goes, Danny, I can't believe this happened to you. It's so unfair. And again, one of those like thoughts in your head right at the moment of what the, I don't know if I can swear on here.
Yeah, you can swear.
Like, what the fuck am I talking? Like feeling bad for myself. She said it's unfair and she's about to die of cancer. And here I am, I just can't walk. And she left and I was like, wow, I got to figure this shit out. And I remembered that I'd followed this guy, Wayne Dyer, Dr. Wayne Dyer. He was a mentor of mine early on. And because going through my stuff with my daughter and giving birth, I had this amazing counselor and social worker who turned me on to a lot of personal development before I even know what personal development was. So Wayne Dyer was one of those people. And I remember him talking about gratitude. And it's like feel like it's sometimes a really beginner personal development thing is gratitude, but it's so powerful and impactful. And I just started going, okay, I need to find something to be grateful for. So instead of being upset and pissed that I can't walk anymore, I'm going to be grateful that I'm alive. And instead of being pissed that I live with my parents, because God, that was a whole other story, but I had to go live back home because I couldn't work or walk. I'm just grateful I have somewhere to go. Like I could have been homeless. So I just had these small gratitude practices that got me through. And then I started making these affirmations and I'd have my mom drive me to the gym with my walker, drop me off for a couple hours. And I put my affirmations on the recumbent bike in front of me. And I would just push my legs around for like 2 hours and just repeat these things. And they were literally like things that weren't happening, right? It was like, I can walk easily and effortlessly. I'm like, no, I could not. I was not walking at all. And things that were just mindset for me and things I had to get over. And I really believe, I think affirmations get a bad rap. I don't think they necessarily work if you just say them once or twice. I think the way I did it, it's almost like extreme repetition, literally hours and hours and hours. It's like if you learn a new language, it takes a long time for you to actually think that language. I took 7 years of French and it's very hard for me to speak French, but I went to France and after about 2 weeks, I remember it was a really cool experience where somebody asked me a question and I just thought in French instead of translating it first and then slowly. Ooh. And I was like, whoa, that was pretty wild. And with affirmations, I started to notice the longer I did it, the more I said it, it soon became my own internal thoughts instead of me like forcing this weird, these fake things that weren't real. Of course, the walking easily and effortlessly was kind of a weird example of that. But I wish I have them somewhere. I should have pulled them up for this, but I had a lot of them that were just really like rewiring thoughts. And I noticed that those started to become my first thoughts instead of my old shitty patterns of thinking. So while I know some affirmations are kind of cheesy and people like, look in the mirror and say you love yourself, like, okay. But I really think there's some power in repetition and in working affirmations. So yeah, started over with injury, illness. There's so many times when it comes to like do over Danny, I started to think about it and I was going, everyone has a start over story at some point in your life, whether it is injury or illness, whether it is an identity thing where you're maybe losing a job or changing careers, or you get a divorce and you're no longer part of a couple, whether it's you move across states or another country. There's so many times and reasons we have to start over. And I feel like I've done just about all of them. So I was like, yes, this is, I don't know if I'm good at it, but I feel like I found a process to it. And I feel like I found a faster way through it. And I noticed that through each of these things that I went through, whether it was the paralysis or the adoption or my divorce or my business changing or my brand identity crisis or moving, which I've done, all of those things kind of follow this own process. And so that's kind of what I shared on the TEDx stage was kind of the 4 steps into kind of getting through that starting over process, because sometimes it just feels so heavy and it feels really, really unfair. Nobody likes to start. You just feel like I got all this ground and now I have to go back to zero. Like, it's so heavy. So the first part is just the reframe of starting over just feels like shit. But if you get a do-over, that's something cool. Like if someone's like, hey, let's just like do this over. Getting a do-over is kind of a phrase that just feels a lot better than having to start over. So that's kind of the first part. But yeah, I think as far as becoming an expert in it, it's like I said, I don't want to be that. Having to start over all the time hasn't felt the best at the time that it happened, but I've learned to get through it faster. And I think that there's definitely some steps that can be taken to help you through it way faster and to thrive through it instead of trudge through it, I guess.
Yeah. And it's beautiful that you help other people do that. You know, by sharing your story, by being vulnerable, you've helped so many people. And you know, like speaking engagements, I can't imagine how many people sit there and then they tell someone to listen to your TED Talk, and like how many people have listened to that. But something I noticed just following you and thinking, like, I would think about, you know, especially this suicidal time in your life. And it's happened a few times since then too, that we haven't gotten into yet. But I always think about who is there for you, right? And just following you too, and just seeing like your social media, I see a lot of friendship. I see that. And I see that with Jill as your co-host too, like the conversations that you have and how she's been there for you. But what has that been like when you are in like the lowest low point possible? Like how, like who are you turning to, and like how are you taking that next step?
This is really good. And it's not a complicated question, but it does have some, I guess, nuance to it. So in 2018, out of kind of nowhere, I had a really big bout with suicidal ideation again. And I was really blindsided by it because everything in my life was going pretty good. And I remember walking with Jill. We were out in LA, and I just had this urge to jump in front of a car. And I just kept thinking, like, I kept having these really invasive thoughts of like, I just want to end this and I just don't want to be here. And I'm like, man, I have some great friendships right now. My business is going really well. Like everything was going well, but I just kept having these spiraling, really damaging thoughts to the point where it scared me. And I went to Jill and I was like, hey, can I borrow your car? I found out there was like an emergency mental health clinic in LA. I don't know if they have them in every city. I don't think they have it here in Vegas. You can go and get mental health meds and to kind of like get yourself off the ledge. And so I said, can I borrow your car? And she goes, yeah, sure. Why? Because I sold my car and I had been just Ubering everywhere. And I didn't really want to tell her, but I did. And I said, well, to be honest, I'm like really struggling and I need to go to this place. And she was like, girl, let me go with you, which was really cool for her to do. But I shared that story on my social media, which I wasn't going to. I was very embarrassed about it. Again, Jill made the point of, hey, if you share this and it helps one person. And I was like, oh, fine. And I shared this, and I shared that I went to this mental health clinic and what happened. And I had people comment and they're like, well, I don't have someone like Jill. I don't have anybody. And I do have to say that nobody is coming to save you. And this is a piece that you have to you got to do it yourself a little bit. So while I did have support and while I had people there, I had to ask for help and I had to accept the support. So I really didn't want to tell her, and I probably could have gone without telling her or saying anything. I think she was safe enough for me to say something to, and I just didn't want to lie. But that being said, as I look back in all these little times, I haven't always had someone. A lot of times it's just been me, or there's been some kind of a reason, like a reason to stay. So like seeing my daughter, I didn't have somebody to talk to about that. I was still suicidal throughout, but I had like this little glimpse or a little piece of me that's like, maybe you can make this work. And I had to really make the effort to find counseling, to find support, to find people I could talk to. So when I was younger, it was actually when I was pregnant, it was actually my boyfriend that I went to a lot and asked for support. But sometimes, and anybody who has any mental health issues will probably really feel this deeply. Sometimes you feel like there's that one person you've gone to so many times that they're tired of hearing about your drama or your shit. And so it can be really scary and hard. And in fact, I'm in contact with my daughter right now, and she's been struggling a little bit. And I think she's having that feeling of like, she messaged me, she goes, hey, can I talk to you? And she's like, I don't want to burden you. I don't want to, and I'm like, I'm not tired of hearing your stuff. I'm going to help you. But I get that feeling of when you're depressed and you are struggling, you feel like such a burden. You don't want to reach out to people. And so what I would like to say to anyone who's there is do it anyway. And the person on the other end can decide whether or not it's too much for them or not. But the other piece is you might have to reach out to professional help, because sometimes it is too much for someone. Sometimes it is like, I had a girlfriend who committed suicide in 2019, and she was messaging me all the time. And she was very much on I don't know, she was in a hard spot, like calling me constantly, like every 5 minutes, leaving messages. And so she was in a really like manic spot where she needed to be hospitalized. And I was like, she needed actual professional help. I couldn't keep her from doing what happened. And it was probably inevitable what happened to her. But there does get to a point where you probably do need professional help. And so you can't expect people to know what to do. It's really a hard place for someone to understand who maybe hasn't been there. So the best advocate you have is yourself. And what's shitty about that is that's when the hardest time it is to ask. And it's the most vulnerable. So I love that there are like suicide hotlines and things like that. I think there's a new number that's even easier. I think it's 988. I should definitely double check that. But I also do have I really have built in some really safe friendships and relationships. And that's just been through trial and error over time, is just asking people to be there for me and then letting them prove that they can be. Because I think sometimes we tell ourselves, nobody can handle me. I'm too much. They're not going to be able to handle this. Well, the only way to find that out is to give them a little something, to share something that hurts and see what happens and see if they can handle it. And as they can prove that they can handle it, then you can let yourself down a little more and let your guard down and maybe let someone else help carry some of the burden for you. But mental health can get us so locked in our head thinking we're the only one. Nobody else can handle us. Nobody else can deal with what we've got. And that can be such a trap. So that's kind of the caveat. It's like, yes, I've had help, but also it's had to be from me to start, because nobody's like really been pushing in, trying to like find out what's going on. In fact, unfortunately, a lot of depression and mental health is hidden really well. You could be smiling and happy on the outside and everyone thinks you're fine and have no idea what you're actually going through. So having to have the courage to ask or get professional help is, I think, where you got to start.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that. It's the ownership of no one's coming to save you. And if I want to feel a different way, okay, well, it starts from within. I got to do something. Even if it's not an action, it's asking is the action, I should say. So yeah. I think we want people to help, but they have to know that you need them to help, right? It takes putting that guard down enough and being open to help, because yeah, you're right. For the longest time I was struggling and you would have never known. But when you let one safe person in, when you make one phone call, one text, nowadays there's lines, one small action, what that's going to do is it's going to build that momentum so that you do continue to have that courage to find those resources out there, because there are so many, and you being one awesome resource. When you share your story, I think Do Over Danny could not be a better name. Like, if you believe in God, the universe, whoever, they put that in your path for a reason, because all you've done is start over and start over and start over. But what I think is beautiful about you is after you start over, you take that time to reflect and then redirect. And through that, you've come up with your acronym, which you teased a little, and it's in your TED Talk. So I'd love for you to just quick touch on that for anyone who's like, all right, Danny, I'm starting over right now. Give me something.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I love that you said that taking the action is sometimes just asking for help too. I just want to not brush over that, because sometimes there are actions we can take. And one thing I do want to mention is sometimes medication is the action to take to stop the spiral. I knew I needed to do something drastic and it wasn't going to change overnight. And so I got on meds, and currently I'm not, but I just barely got off them again. And it's been like a trial and error. And I've done a lot of different healing modalities. I've done some psychedelic journeys, and I've done different trauma work, and I've done just a lot of stuff to see what works and what doesn't. And so there's no shame in trying. And I think sometimes when you're in the bottom pits, you're just like, I'll try anything. Give me anything. So do it. Do whatever you need to take. Don't let a stigma of something or thinking something's wrong with you or you're broken if you take meds. Do what you got to do to save yourself, and then you can figure it out later, but just take that first step. So I wanted to just hit that on your point about action. As far as the acronym, so the acronym is GIFT. And the idea is that there is a gift in whatever your do-over is. And the first letter is G, starts with grieve. And I think that this was a part when I was doing a lot of research on starting over, nobody really gave this enough credit, I think. And it's such an important part. Like if someone dies in your life, nobody expects that you're not going to grieve, right? There's a certain expectation that like grief is what happens after a loss, but the loss doesn't always have to be death. Literally, I just mentioned all of these other losses. In fact, I sent this to my dad the other day. I'm going to have to pull it up on my phone, but there are so many things that we can grieve besides death. There's literally like the loss of a job, the loss of identities in our, like your kids growing up and they move out and suddenly you don't have that mom identity anymore. The loss of your health, like grieving who you once were. When I was paralyzed, I was grieving who I was. I'm like, I'm not an acrobat anymore. I'm not who I thought I was. That was huge. And I didn't realize that that was a process. And I was going through all those stages of grief. Like we've heard of the stages of grief. There's like shock, anger, finally acceptance, but there's so many stages of grief and we really don't allow ourselves to feel those feelings. So the first part is, and anything is starting over, is actually like allow yourself to feel the feelings and recognize that that's part of the process of moving on, is you have to grieve the loss before you can move on. When I went through my divorce, that was probably one of the hardest I've ever grieved anything. And it's interesting, you know, you hear people get divorced all the time and like 50% of marriages, and it's so cavalier and easy. I did not recognize or realize how devastating it would be. Because one, I didn't think it would happen to me. I don't think anyone does. And two, I didn't realize how much of like that person in my life was in my mind as my future. So when someone has a miscarriage, a lot of times there's a lot of grief there, but people don't want to talk about it because they're like, well, it wasn't a real baby yet. And it's like, but you already had an idea of a future, of this future child and what was going to happen. So you're grieving that future. You're grieving the idea you had. You're grieving something that maybe wasn't tangible yet, but there is grief. And so I found this it was Dr. Caroline Leaf's Instagram. She said examples of grief that aren't related to death. One, change in financial status. Huge. It could be up or down. Like actually becoming rich after being broke, it can actually be a grief too. Two, moving house, city, or country. And I'm just saying these because they're also starting over points. Three, loss of a relationship due to you prioritizing your healing and mental health. Four, loss of a job. Five, retirement. Six, infertility. Seven, change in body shape and size. Eight, loss of health. Nine, divorce or breakup. Or 10, loss of old habits that once provided something. All of these are things that you can and probably would grieve over and are also kind of these starting over. So first part of the acronym GIFT is grief. And I think it's such a big piece that we really can't skip over. Like allow yourself to feel the feelings, allow yourself to have the anger, go to the counseling, talk about it. But it's okay to be sad about what you don't have anymore and to literally grieve it the same way you might grieve some person that you lost. The second letter is I. It's for insights. And just back to what you said, I think it was Brooke, I think you said it about me finding like lessons after everything and coming back and kind of like taking a beat and kind of working through it, is finding the insights. Like, what did I learn from this? What did it mean to me? What kind of things can I take from this? When I did my podcast episode on the affairs, the episode 3 was about the lessons from the affairs. And while, yes, like my husband did the thing, there were a lot of lessons for me to get out of it, like who I could be as a person, who I could be as a wife, maybe going forward. And so what are the insights? Same with losing the ability to walk. Even though I can walk again and I could do all those things, I learned a ton. I learned about compassion. I learned about how hard it is to get around as a disabled person. I had so much more compassion for people who can't get around and don't have all of the mobility that I have. And so taking all of the things, even as sucky as it is, whether the loss of the relationship or your health or your body or money, like what'd you learn from it? Is there anything you can take from it? Because the lessons are probably the only thing that are going to make it not repeat again, or at least not repeat again the same way. And then F is forgiveness. And this one's huge. I think sometimes we're starting over due to our own choice. Maybe you're moving and you want to, but you're still grieving it and you still are like struggling with it. But maybe you're getting a divorce because your husband had an affair and you're like, dude, this sucks. This wasn't my choice. Or maybe you're starting over because you got in an accident. You can't walk. And you're like, I didn't choose this. I didn't want to get in this car accident. And maybe you're pissed at the world. Maybe you're pissed at God. Maybe you're pissed at yourself. But forgiveness really helps unlock, I think, the energy it's like unlocking the moving forward energy. Like when we're stuck in being angry and blaming someone, and that could be blaming ourselves, it could be blaming the universe. We can't really get anywhere through that. And I think sometimes people think forgiveness means that what someone did was okay. And if it's something that was done to you, it's not about letting someone off the hook. Like I was telling you guys before we started, I was robbed 3 times in the last year, and I was pissed. And the only way I could let it go, I remember thinking like, God, these assholes just took my stuff. And the only thing I could think of was like, I hope that they took my stuff and sold it to feed their babies at home. And like, that's the only way I could just let it go. And I'm like, like bless this stuff and let it go. Like I can buy it again. And I did. And like, got a couple $1,000s worth of equipment stolen. And that sucked, but you have to let it go because otherwise it just eats you up alive. And I think forgiving ourselves sometimes can be the hardest, but it's important to forgive. And one of my mentors says forgiveness is a practice. I think so often we say, I forgive you, and then it's fine. But I can't tell you how many times I had to forgive my ex-husband. And then I get triggered again. I was like, oh, this motherfucker. And then I'm like, no, I let it go. And then something else would come up. But I'm finally at a place now where I've truly forgiven him, and we can have conversations and it doesn't trigger me. But forgiving isn't like forgive and forget. It's very hard to forget, but we can forgive and not have any emotional triggers around it anymore. And that can take EMDR therapy. That can take a lot of things in order to move through, but forgiveness is a practice. So don't ever feel like, I used to say this, I'm like, I already forgave. Like, why is this coming up again? Well, that's part of forgiveness. It's a practice. It's not a one and done thing. And then the last letter T, on my TED Talk, I actually said it's truth, but I've actually recently decided to change that to trust. So truth, Tony Robbins, he says that sometimes we look at things as they are. Well, we tend to over exaggerate, right? So we don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. And so truth was about seeing the truth, but I've changed it to trust, because I think what really the next step is trusting that you can handle the next step. And so often we get so nervous, we get so wrapped up in our trauma that we don't know where to go next, or we lose trust in like people in general. Like, for example, my ex having the affair, I'm like, how am I supposed to trust men after this? Like, is everyone going to be an asshole? I had to choose to trust again. I also had to choose to trust myself that I could handle it on my own, or that if I got in a bad relationship, I'd figure it out. And so trust is really this deeper knowing that whatever happens, you're going to figure it out. You're going to be able to handle it. You're going to be able to figure out the next step. If everything is taken from you, you got to trust that you can pick yourself back up again and again and again and again. And I think that actually is what has helped me through all of these starting overs repeatedly, is now I just have the trust that, okay, life's going to throw more shit at me. I get it. Like after that TED Talk, my mom passed away 4 months later. And that was another blow. And I remember thinking, thank God I wrote that TED Talk this year. I'm like, here we are in grief again. And here we are starting over with this. And it's been a process, but I was glad that I had that framework to really, it's almost like I wrote it for myself, for my future self to have to remember what I need to do, and trusting that I will figure it out, trusting that this grief isn't going to last forever. The sadness isn't going to last forever, trusting that it's going to happen again. I'll lose my dad. I'm going to lose other people, trusting that when that happens, I'll be able to handle it then too. And so this whole thing is not necessarily a linear, like first you grieve, then you get the insights, then you forgive. I mean, everything can kind of be fluid. I think the forgiveness goes up and down. Grieving can last a long time, and that's all in it. And you're going to find insights as you go. If someone had told me the week after my husband had the affair, like, what are the lessons? I would have been like, fuck off, Brenda. Like, there's no lessons in this right now. Like this is not supposed to happen. Like I was not available for insights at that point. But with time and after processing and after grieving and after working through stuff, oh, so many insights. But sometimes it's not the time for that. So this isn't like a step-by-step process. These are the steps, but just so you know, like some of them will come in and out and flow in between each other.
Yeah, I was just going to say what I love about this is that they're all a process together, because I think sometimes when you hear personal development, it's just have gratitude, right? And you're like, dude, I'm depressed and I don't want to live another day. How the hell am I going to be grateful? Right. But when you mention the trust piece, what I think is trusting that, okay, I've been in this space before. And if I just allow myself to have time to use the tools I know that have helped before, kind of using those insights, right? It's like as you go through things, you build and you use all four of those interchangeably in a way. So when I was listening to your TED Talk, I'm like, I do all of those in one day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it isn't linear, but you have those tools that you can grasp when you're in dark moments, when you're at that starting point of, what do I really need right now? Do I need a kick in the ass and I need to, switch the script, or do I need to allow myself to grieve? And kind of meeting yourself where you're at is what kept popping up for me when I was listening to you.
Oh, I got chills. Yeah. Meeting yourself where you're at is such a underrated kind of place to be, because we tend to go to this, well, I should be here by now, or I should be in this place. And it's like,
you're not.
Exactly. You're not. And I've done that to myself so many times. And it's, when I was in fitness and working with people in weight loss, like let's say somebody had a goal to lose like 50 pounds by this date, but they were only down maybe 25. So then suddenly their weight loss goal had to be like, well, now I have to lose 75 pounds by this to get to where I want. It's like, no, you have to adjust your goal now. You're not there. So you can't be at 75 if you're not at the 50 at this benchmark. So let's just adjust the goal. And so I think we have to really learn more about meeting ourselves where we're at instead of where we think we should be, because you're just not there. And that's okay.
Yeah. And that radical honesty too of like, where even are you? Right.
Yeah.
Like not sugarcoating it of like, this sucks, but this is my truth.
Yeah.
And moving forward, I think everything starts with the mind, right? And that mindset around it. And sometimes that mindset is positive, and that's where toxic positivity gets a bad rep. And it's like, no, sometimes you do need to pour in the gratitude and pull yourself through. But other times you have to sit in that grief and ask for support or ask for help. Because if you go straight through it, or like too quick almost, I think you're setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah. Well, early on too, when I shared the gratitude part of, getting out of me walking again, that wasn't like an instant light switch, right? I still felt bitter most of the time. I'm like, okay, what can I be grateful for? Like, I'm not grateful that I'm sitting here in my parents' house, that I lost my job that I love, that I can't walk. Like, it's bullshit. I didn't want to find anything to be grateful for. So I had to find the smallest things. And that did not change my whole mindset overnight. That didn't turn me into like this happy person. I'm so grateful. I'm like, okay, today I can be grateful I'm not homeless. Still, I'm not happy about it, but okay, like there's that. It was almost like this, fine, if I have to find something to be grateful for, I will. But it is sometimes one of those, it's again, one of those tools like gratitude and affirmations. Love them because they've changed my life, but also like a heavy asterisk star, like, and also,
yes,
it's not exactly what you think. Like, it's not the magic pill. It's not going to change your life. It's not going to like make everything better instantly. Like, it's still a process and it's still a practice.
Yeah. Going back to that ownership piece, if you want something to change, you got to do something differently.
Something that I am so curious about with what you've been through in your life is like the anxiety of waiting, like what ball's going to drop next with how many like big things have happened. I mean, I can't imagine what would be harder than what you've already gone through, but do you ever just like find yourself anxious about what will happen next? Or like wondering like, oh God, I'm young.
Things are really good right now. What's going to happen?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I got introduced to this woman last year named the Grief Guru, and I've been wanting to have her on my podcast. And she went through like 2 really big losses. I think it was her mom and her son. And so she's like, I think this is my life's work. And so I wanted to ask her almost the same thing. Like, since you're the Grief Guru, now do you think like that's just God's way? You're just going to keep losing people? Like and so I've actually thought this myself of like, if I take this on, if I say this is what I do, does that just mean the universe is going to continue to give me reasons to start over? Like, is this going to be my freaking life's work? Like next week, something shitty is going to happen and I have to keep making lessons of it. So to answer your question, yes, I've had those thoughts. And especially when it feels like things are happening back to back to back, which I really feel like the last 5 years have been that. But it's funny because this year there was kind of a reprieve of nothing happening. And one of my girlfriends, she was giving this necklace away at one of her retreats and said, show me. And basically her limiting belief was that life has to be hard. And I guess a coach of hers said, why do you make life so hard? Maybe just ask the universe, show me how it can be easy. And so she's like, I started experimenting with things and starting to just ask the universe, like, show me how this can be easy. It doesn't have to be hard. Show me how it can be easy. And so I thought about that. And I really think that our mindset, I don't believe we manifest everything. There's some stuff that I'm like, okay, the robberies, that was bullshit. I actually talked to a friend after. She's like, what do you think it was about you that someone broke into? I was like, nobody,
No way.
Like, that wasn't my fault. I'm not going to take that on. Assholes be assholes. And I was in Mexico and they broke into our Airbnb. So I'm like, no, I'm not taking that on. So I think we manifest things up to a point. I don't think that everything is in our control, but I think that our attitude can help shape all that. So there was definitely a time, like we got our puppy last year at the, after the second robbery and after my mom died and all this stuff. And I'm like, my dog, she was a puppy. She got really sleepy. And literally she was just sleepy, but I'm like, fuck, she has parvo. And I started bawling. I'm like, my dog is sick. And now, of course, like this happens. My mom dies and now I'm getting a puppy. And then finally a good thing happens in my life. And my dog's going to die. And I was so dramatic about it. And then literally the next day she was fine playing. And it was that I was just like, I'm waiting for the next thing. And I kept thinking like, I finally have something good. It's going to be taken away. My dog's going to be hit by a car. She's going to get sick. And I was like, okay, that's not helping me. It's really not. And it can be hard because when you have constant things going on, you can really feel like, what's next? When's the shoe going to drop? Like, I'm just waiting for it. I really had to work hard this year. I can't tell you, this is probably the year I've done, and this is saying a lot because I've done a lot of counseling in my life. Probably the year I've done the most work with counselors, coaches, different kind of assisted therapies to really work through some of this deeper stuff, because I was like, I don't want this to be my narrative. I don't want it to be the narrative that I have, that I'm waiting for the ball to drop. I'm waiting for my, boyfriend to do something, I'm waiting for my dog to die. Like, that's just not what I want to be doing. So that's, I think, something that can be a thought pattern, and that can also turn into self-fulfilling prophecy if you don't catch it. And so I've done a lot of work on that this year. So to be honest, now that you've asked the question, I'm thinking about it. I think I feel pretty damn good. And I haven't really thought that much lately. But I also have to say this, that humor is huge and it has helped me through so much. So sometimes I'm just like, of course this would happen to me. Like, yes, at this point, it's just hilarious, right? I'm like, I got robbed twice in Mexico. Then 8 months later, our house here. And we got home and I was just like, the third time it didn't even faze me. I'm like, of course I did. Like, why wouldn't they break into our house out of all of the houses in this entire neighborhood? It's me. Like, that's what's going to happen to me. So I've turned to humor sometimes just to like take the edge off of it. And I just kind of laugh at some of these things. And I think maybe it's a coping skill, maybe not, but I think it helps. I think it helps just to go, you know what? This is just, it's comical at this point. So we're just going to roll with it.
I think it works, especially when you're doing all of the deeper work. Like, again, with the ownership piece, you are doing all of these therapies. When we were doing our research on you, we heard ayahuasca and we're like, okay, let's dive into that. The mushrooms, all of the things with psychedelics. So I'm curious, just a little snippet of what that was like for you.
Oh my God. Well, you know what's crazy, y'all? I just got back from a second ayahuasca ceremony a month ago. So I have some more recent ayahuasca experience. So just a real quick thing for anybody who's unaware, ayahuasca is a plant medicine that is traditionally used in South America, Colombia, Costa Rica, these old traditions. And what people have been finding them for more and more now is to help treat PTSD, depression, a lot of mental health issues, addictions. And I first learned about it, I think, on a Tim Ferriss podcast in 2015. Was very curious, but I didn't know anybody who did anything like that. Don't know how to find it. So didn't do much digging into it. And then the story I shared with you earlier, 2018, I went to the mental health clinic. One of my friends reached out in the DMs and he said, "Hey, have you heard of ayahuasca?" And I said, "Actually, I have, but I, don't know much about it." So he connected me with a retreat where you do ayahuasca for 5 nights. And I was like, I'm going, I'm down. This was February 2019. Now I was on meds. So that was June 2018 or July, something like that. I was on meds through that whole time. But before you do it, you have to get off your medication. So like preparing, I go do this thing. Y'all, it was wild. I never done like drugs in my life. I had never done mushrooms. I never done, like, I drank alcohol, but that's as far as it goes. Like, I'm not a big weed person or anything. So you drink, it's a drink. It's kind of like a cup of nasty molasses. And you drink it and then you go sit and you wait for the experience to hit you.
Thank you for listening. Tune in Thursday, January 26th for part 2 with Danny J. You'll hear about her experience with different healing modalities in detail, how she handles other people's judgment of her journey, and how she's began to trust herself after all the hardships she's faced. See you then.